Hello and welcome to the Breaking Muscle podcast, the show that brings you the top minds in the fitness industry who share their knowledge and experience to help motivate and inspire you to take your training to the next level. I'm your host, Tom McCormick, and today I'm joined by Michael Goulden. Michael is a personal trainer who founded his training facility, Integra, way back in 1997. Since then, he has been integrating exercise mechanics with neuromuscular preparation to create a uniquely sustainable approach to health, fitness, and performance. On top of this, he has gone on to become one of the leading fitness educators in the UK. In this episode, we take a deep dive into all things exercise mechanics. Within the conversation, we discuss the importance of exercise mechanics on training efficiency, considerations for individualizing the process, active versus passive range of motions, matching exercises and programs to goals, and providing a full contractile range challenge to muscles. So, without further delay, it's on with the podcast. So, Michael, thanks for taking the time today to chat a little bit and talk everything fitness and exercise mechanics, which is going to be a big focus of our discussion today. Before we move on to that, though, can you give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself and your journey into the fitness industry?
Sure. And thanks for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to speak with you again. I actually started training, and I was just working this out before we came on the call. I actually started training when I was 10. So we're talking 1990. And I started working as a gym instructor in 1995. So just, I think I was 15, 16 years old at that point. And this is pertinent because it's really, like you, I love going to the gym. I love the gym. I love exercise. I love the feeling of all of this stuff that we do. And sometimes, we're how many years later, 20, 30 years later, it's really hard for us to know what it's like not to enjoy the gym. Mm-hmm. And we're part of a small select group of individuals that enjoy the gym. We're talking, 3 to 10% of the population. So there's a bunch of people out there that don't realize or don't receive the benefits of exercise because they don't love it. And sometimes there's a mismatch in terms of what we do. But yeah, I started in the industry in 1995 and just worked my way through the ranks at that point. Back in those days, a personal trainer was an oddity, especially in Leeds. But yeah, for the last 22, 23 years, I've been a personal trainer, and I've had a private studio in London for nearly as long as well.
Wow. Okay. So that means that you pretty quickly moved from Leeds to London and set up a studio.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it was really just luck and chance and coming across the right people and again all the way through. The only thing that I bring to it is that I'm just really excited and passionate about this stuff. So it's. Again, it's not, even back then when I opened a studio, there weren't that many of them. And I know there's one on every corner right now, but it was just, for me, I really just wanted to create an environment for clients, for my clients that was conducive to getting results, which isn't necessarily always the case in some of the gyms that I know that me and you like to go to.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So, okay, so that's interesting. So, are you in the same location now that you were all the time, or it's moved? And if it has moved, how many times?
Oh, this is the third iteration of a studio.
Fine.
So I actually moved into a much bigger one and took a wrong direction, and I decided to close it down and moved into this one.
Okay. And you talk about results and how that's really fundamental to what you're doing, and how it maybe isn't in some of the the other gyms that are available. And then your route to delivering what is what you determine as results for your clients, has that changed? Has your path been kind of all over the place, or have you been pretty laser focused the whole way?
Oh, it's definitely changed. It's definitely changed. But I was actually speaking to someone the other day about education, about what courses to do, and the education route that I took over the years, and I've done a bunch of courses every single year since I've been doing this, but every course was based around trying to answer a question, and the question that I had always came from a client, and that's the route. And I've kind of gone through the functional training thing. So we're talking like in 1999, 2000, 2001. I've gone through that route. I've gone through the kind of the different worlds that we had. It's only been the last, I don't know, 15 years, let's say. So what are we in 2019? Yeah, the last 2004, 2005, where I've actually really kind of honed it down and tried to figure out what are the underlying principles. So even in all the manual therapy stuff that I've done, it's like, what are the underlying principles? What am I trying to change here? And my kind of route, going down a biomechanical route, and that's what my master's degree is in, and that's what I'm really passionate about, is that biomechanics gives me the tool to step away from it being my opinion or your opinion, because our opinions are kind of irrelevant. It's what can we measure, and it's the measurement thing which gets me excited.
Absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned biomechanics and going to university for that and everything. So at what point in the journey did you take yourself to university and do that?
Well, I don't have an undergrad, so I have a postgrad. I have a master's degree in biomechanics.
Skip that part.
Why waste your time?
Exactly.
Because when I was younger, I started working and I left home when I was younger, and university wasn't in our field of vision where I grew up, and so I kind of went straight into work. And I went straight into work, and I was working full time, and couldn't afford the idea of even thinking about going to university was not there. So it must have been 2008 where I approached the university, and there's pre-accredited learning here in the UK. And so I went down that route and just kind of took effectively a portfolio of all the courses that I've done, kind of what I'd done up until that point, all of the kind of vocational qualifications. And, I was really lucky in getting a good letter of recommendation from a couple of people, and I was really lucky to get onto that course. So that's a pretty recent thing, and I don't think that I would have got much out of that course had I just gone into it. I don't even know how old you would be if you were just going straight through university, but I think it's like 21 or 22. I think me, as in my late 20s, early 30s, is definitely got more out of that course.
Yes. Yeah, I can sympathise, or sort of not sympathise is right, but certainly empathise with that, because after having to give up rugby through injury, I went back to uni as like a mature student. I wasn't necessarily that mature, but I was certainly got a whole lot more out of the experience than had I gone straight from school. I really valued the experience, and to some extent you get out what you put in, and I put a whole lot more into that, and I'm sure by the stage you were going, that you maximised your return on investment, as it were.
Yeah. And one of the things, you have access to this Vicon camera system and Force platform and all of this, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of equipment, and I had loads of questions. So I had questions about the split squat. So I was able, in one of my case studies, to look at the split squat and actually kind of map that out and look at the forces going through both knees. And if you look at the research into the split squat, people weren't looking at both knees; they were just looking at the front knee. And so there's been this conversation about, should the knee go over the toe, and if not, and it's like, what if that person had really long toes? What if that person has got size 13 feet? Do we treat them different? I mean, it's a distraction, because the reality is that the rear knee, the knee is going so far in front of the toes that it just kind of it just kind of makes a mockery of kind of what we kind of spend our time looking at. But because I had those questions, I was able to go and analyze them and actually get the real life data from a bunch of people, which was fun. And that was kind of, and back to the original point, it's the clients that show up with the problems. I can look at my bookcase up here, and I can look at all the research papers that I've got on my laptop, and it says that this research paper, 200 people perform the bench press, and if you go 1.76 times your acromial width, you'll hit this division. I have a client here that can't do that, and they can't do that because of their underlying architecture, their structure, their shoulder, their forearm is shorter than the clients are giving us all of the information, all of the questions all the time.
Absolutely. And actually, that's an interesting point. So with biomechanics, I think there's a difference between biomechanics and exercise mechanics. Would you agree with that? And there's a subtle difference between the two.
Yeah, so when I did my master's, it was a sports biomechanics degree, postgrad degree. And so that is really looking at gait analysis. It's looking at running. It's looking at jumping. It is looking at the kind of the gross movement. Exercise mechanics, and I've learned exercise mechanics from my mentor, my teacher, Tom Purvis, who founded the resistance training specialist program. So he talks about exercise mechanics as being like a sub-domain of biomechanics. So exercise mechanics is really looking at the mechanics of the forces when we get onto that leg extension. And then let's zoom in onto the knee. And then when you're doing that dumbbell lateral raise, what happens there versus the cable lateral raise? And so it's really getting specific to the exercise. So it's the mechanics of exercise rather than generalized sport.
Yes. And for what for the listeners, that's what they're really interested in, because we're talking about how your gym performance or what you do in the gym translates either to your goals, whether that be increased strength, muscle mass, or performance in a sporting environment. So I think it's important to have that distinction and realize there's a difference, but then also let's dive into exercise mechanics a little bit. And you mentioned your mentor there, Tom Purvis. Is that who in about 2004, 2005, is that who you started learning from? Is that this stuff, or was it from somewhere else first and you found him after?
No, back in the early 2000s, I was just getting really bored of the guru-led education program. And I had an experience where I followed, a particular person. I looked at all the information. I applied it to my clients. And some people got amazing results and some people didn't. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to know, why did these people get amazing results and these people didn't? And to cut a long story short, eventually I was offered the opportunity to actually pay, because I like to pay people for their time, and pay for tutoring. And I took one of the cases where I couldn't solve the issue. And I said, this is what I'd explored, and I've looked at this, and this. Where next? And there was nowhere next. And there was nowhere next because there was no underlying principles. And at that point, it was just kind of, I really wanted to understand the underlying mechanisms for, if I want to help you build muscle, what are the underlying mechanisms? If I want my client out there to build muscle, what's the underlying mechanisms I can apply to them? And how am I going to get them results different to you? And that's where I just started searching for experts in their field. So, I have a teacher who's an expert in the neuroscience of exercise. I've got a teacher who's an expert in spinal mechanics. I've got a teacher in Tom who's an expert in exercise mechanics. And it was really, it's probably pre-2004 where I was reading his stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I think it must have been 2004, maybe a bit earlier, when I first jumped on a plane and went to Oklahoma just to sit in one of his classes and kind of have my kind of brain melted somewhat in just 3.5, 4 days. Yeah, and that's kind of where the journey went from there, and it's kind of just steamrolled from there.
Yes, yeah, so sort of like picked up pace, and you've gone deep dive in that element.
Yeah. So
let's talk about how basically exercise mechanics. What I find is you've mentioned principles a few times, and there's people seem to get caught up on protocols, not principles, and how you can, and that's the way I see it in a lot of people. And protocols sell and they're sexy and they get eyeballs, and principles maybe not so much. So can you explain some of the underlying principles that go behind what you do and how you apply those?
Sure. I'm going to reverse the question in a little bit. If we were to develop a program to educate people who are not trainers in how to become a trainer, we've got to start somewhere. And so if I'm going to teach you the squat as if there's just one universal squat, you've got to start somewhere. And if I teach you about the 25,000 variables that may go into that, slight exaggeration, but the bunch of variables that go into building Tom's squat, you're not even going to get past the first base. And so the protocols really exist. It's a really good thing. When I learned how to be a gym instructor, I needed your protocol. But it gets to a point that if I'm going to be charging 50, 100, 250 pound an hour for personal training, then we need to step away from that protocol, because the squat doesn't exist. Tom's squat, Michael's squat, Ian's squat, I'm looking, he's about to start his training session. That's the real thing. And so it's kind of, so for us to build Tom's squat, what do we need to think about? And the first thing we need to think about is what's going on with your architecture. And so you present with something in terms of, you've got a hip joint and you've got a knee joint and you've got an ankle joint. What's going on at each of these joints? And then if we're looking at your femur and we're looking at your tibia and fibula, you've got a certain length. Those are things that you turn up with. You might not be able to perform that predetermined protocol because this is the shape of your joint, or this is the length of your femur, or your tibia relative to your femur is much shorter. So the way that you perform the squat, it looks more like a deadlift. So instead of going down that route of going, well, your feet need to be hip width apart, which everyone gets wrong anyway because the hips are not the outside of the ilium, but your feet need to be hip width apart. Instead of doing that, it's really looking at, well, what are you presenting with today? And so there's always a couple of questions before I prescribe an exercise. There's always a couple of questions that I need to answer. The first one is who is turning up? So if it is Tom, we need to be looking at things like architecture and your training experience and maybe your injury experience. Then we need to think about what your goal is. And then we need to think about what do you have today? So what are you turning up with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, as you say, probably something that it's maybe a differentiation on your journey from good to great coach type thing is you're going to go through this process where there's the best exercises is your belief early on, and then you kind of go through that journey and realize that there's context to everything, and what fundamental to that is obviously the individual. So when you're working with someone, they come through the door, you're working for the first time, you've been doing this ages, you can probably look at them and pick up a lot of cues, just from looking at limb length relative to torso or something like that, for example. But that takes a trained eye and practice. How would someone go about assessing, if they're sitting at home thinking, oh, you know what, this might be useful for my own training, how maybe someone, what information might be they looking at for themselves to start getting some clues about what's good, what can be better for them?
You know, the easiest one in the gym, and I was training this morning in the gym and I was looking at how people were training, the easiest thing, we've got this idea that there's a full range of motion. And so if I said to you, and for the people not watching on video and they're listening, if I said to you, what's the full range of motion for the bench press? It looks something like your arms are fully locked out at the top, and then you kind of fold your arms down so your arms are somewhere near the side of your chest. And we've got this idea that this is the full range of motion. However, your joint has got a particular range, and the shape and the size of that joint, and then the shape and size of the ligaments around that joint, and then the muscular contribution all dictate how far you can actually go. So if we're relying on the principle of the bench press, which is, what is it now? It's the bar should touch the chest. If you've got a really short forearm, that may work and that may be really effective. If your forearm's really long, then you're actually going to be putting your shoulder into a more extreme position of horizontal abduction. So the easiest thing to do with that is you can grab hold of a stick, or you can do it with a rope, or you can just do it free form. You actually sit upright like we're doing right now. And you actually perform where your hands are, and you actually perform that movement, and you figure out how far that bar wants to travel when the bar's not pushing you further. Because that bar, which is 20 plus whatever you're putting on the sides, is going to push you wherever it can push you. But that's one of the things that we start to look at in terms of the active range of motion of the joint that's specific to the exercise. If you think of a leg press, so I can jump onto my leg press here. And when I was training in a gym when I was like 12 years old, it was seen your knees should be touching your chest.
Yes.
Now I might have some, disc bulge at L3, L4 because of that. Because over the years, what I was doing was I was driving past my hip range, and then I was driving my pelvis into this posterior tilt. I was going into lumbar flexion. That may have been too extreme for my spine. And so another thing with that leg press, when you're in that position, can you maintain a position, and can you flex your hip a little bit more? Can you move your foot away from that platform? So there are a couple of things here in terms of, we've got the principle you should do a full range, but full range of what? And if we can stay within the active range, we may limit the risk of injury, and we may start to just focus in on what might be one of our primary responsibilities, which is to stimulate tissue. Because at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is stimulate change, and we need forces for that. And we might want to kind of restrict where we may be going into those grey areas.
Yeah. And so for a lot of people, them think, how does this apply to me? But if they're looking to build muscle, or as much muscle as possible, they want to be taxing those tissues, not straining the joints. And whilst they may be thinking they're doing more work touching the chest, for example, as taking your example on the bench press, actually they're challenging the muscle more potentially by just working within their active range, and that would be a key takeaway. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So if you think what we're trying to do, we're trying to apply forces to our body, and we're applying forces to every tissue in the body. So let's think muscles. We're thinking ligaments. We're thinking bones. We're thinking the joint capsule. We're thinking all of the tissues that are in and around there. And force is the number one thing. This is the currency for change. We're trying to initiate change. We want to make sure that we'll maximize muscle development, tissue development, while minimizing extreme forces on the joint. So if you can get to horizontal abduction, and if you can take it to a certain point and the bar is touching your chest, that's cool, then go for it. But if when you're doing this range and your joint and your nervous system is limiting how far you're going, this is the range to respect. And any further past that, you just go into this gray area. And a gray area meaning you don't know for definite that you're going to have an injury, but you also don't know for definite if that's a safe place for you to go. Mm-hmm. It's just the risk to benefit ratio starts to kind of outweigh towards the risk.
Yes. Okay, interesting. So yeah, so someone with a big barrel chest and short forearms, their range, well, interesting. The range the bar moves may be no different, but it touches their chest. But someone with a shallow chest and long arms, the range of the bar is exactly the same, but it's nowhere near their chest. And the point is that you're starting to individualize the exercise to meet the person who's trying to get the outcome. And
even if you just think about that, so who are the best powerlifters? The best powerlifters are not the best swimmers. Mm. And we're not seeing any NBA players do any powerlifting and vice versa. Yeah. So the need of the sport for you to be able to dunk is very different to the need of the sport for you to be able to do powerlifting. And the only problem that we've got is that we're bringing sport into health and fitness and exercise. So even for physique athletes, that we train some of those physique athletes, this is not a sport. This is something what we're trying to do. We're trying to stimulate for a specific adaptation. So the rules of that sport, which are powerlifting, as in you've got to touch the bar to chest, are really relevant over there, but just not over here.
Yes. Okay. It's a great point. And in terms of training and efficiency, getting the most for our clients or for ourselves when we're training, a lot of people again seem to be focused on the program and this magical program, and then neglecting the fact that it sort of all starts with the rep and the exercise, and every repetition is a growth opportunity, a strength building opportunity. And if you're not maximizing every single rep, you're by definition not maximizing your output and your overall results. So we really should be cognizant of this fact and considering how to optimize our exercise selection.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And on
that point as well, there's no, like, I can be doing this thing all day long. I'm doing some movement, some arbitrary movement. I'm waving to you, and I probably look like a bit of a dick on the video right now. But this thing's not going to cause any hypertrophy in my wrist or my forearm. It's actually when you apply forces to the muscle. And so there's no magic in movement. It doesn't matter if you do all of these movements. It's the forces affecting your body, and it's the forces affecting the specific tissues. And so that's what we're trying to do, is kind of step away from everyone should do this exercise. I love the squat. Everyone should not do it. I love the bench press. Everyone should not do it. What's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? And so it's instead of there's a world in our industry that's saying that muscles don't matter. It's about movement. And I'm on the other side of the fence. Movement's important. But to initiate change, it's about the stimulation on the right tissues. The muscles are really key.
Yes, and actually, so if we can increase the capacity of the muscle, even if you're someone who then needs a movement, you have a greater capacity. It's like, I don't know, putting a bigger engine in a car or something, and then you have the skill of the movement. If we're talking about someone who's playing a sport, and then that greater horsepower transfers over.
Absolutely.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So. You've got someone comes in, they present to you, and you've asked them, or you ask yourself who they are, what they've got, what's unique about them, what are their goals, how are you then building, how does the process, if someone is working with you, step by step, walk me through the journey a little bit about how you take someone from A to B. I'm
gonna generalize a little bit, because we have a framework, but it does kind of dance around based upon needs and whatnot. But let's talk about from a performance capacity. So 25% of the people that come here, our clients, our athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So this morning I saw one of my athletes that's been coming, and she's a cyclist. So now we've got a goal. So we've got a client, and when she first came here, we knew that she needed to, by this season, she needed to be able to compete at a high level. So what were her requirements? Her requirements were to increase the amount of wattage that she could put into the bike, which means she needs to be able to increase the amount of force she can take from her body into the bike. So that's her goal, which is a really kind of, this is not general population stuff right now. And I will go to that end of the spectrum as well. So for me, what I'm trying to do is figure out where are the leaks and kind of plug the leaks. So when she's on the bike, she's got to be able to in a certain position, be able to exert a certain amount of force. So here in the gym, what I'm doing is I'm thinking about what's missing. So is there something missing in terms of around the hip, around the knee, and around the ankle? And so it might be that I'm assessing range of motion. So what positions can she get her joints into actively and passively? We might be looking at, in terms of muscle contraction, are there any areas that she has a deficiency in contraction? And then we're going up to output. So is there going to be a difference? So for example, on the leg extension, if she does a single leg extension, is there a difference between how much she can do left versus right? And that's going to be the first port of call for her. And that's what we did. We spent a lot of time, because she was seeing imbalances in strength in terms of how much she could do in a single joint exercise. And then bit by bit, we went down this continuum of starting to integrate into more compound multi-joint exercises, and then on from there. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of more extreme end of what we do. For the general population, it's actually the same. And so we really kind of go, the client comes in, what have they been doing up until now? So if the client's done nothing, then they've done nothing. And where do we want the client to get to? And we want the client to get to somewhere that's relative to their stated and unstated goals. And their stated goals might be, I want to look good, I want to feel good. Their unstated goals might be, they need control, they need some muscular development, they need to be able to move in a way that is conducive to improving their life. So if those are the goals that they come in, we go through the same process. So they've done nothing up until now, so anything is going to be a stimulus. Anything's going to be more of a stimulus than they've done before. So we're looking at how do their joints move? How do their muscles contract? How much output do they do? And then we start to build exercises from there. And we might start with more single joint exercises before progressing to compound. So I don't know if you can see that the framework is really, really similar in terms of the steps that we take. It's just, where are they starting on that continuum? Mm-hmm. I know that was really vague, and I know that was kind of like top level stuff, but that's the kind of direction that we take with clients. It's for us, finding out where they are, what they've done, and going, what's the minimum effective dose to create change?
Yes.
So what we don't do, which is what I used to do when I was not thinking, I don't go into my book over there and go, I know I'm going to do this GVT, or I'm going to do this NMTXS, or whatever other acronym we're going to use. I'm not going to get this program and just apply it to this person. And although that might create a change, although that might get results, we see our clients for years and years and years. And so we think about this long term. So all of our clients, I've still got clients from when I first opened a studio. So we don't do 6-week transformations. So what we're trying to do is just kind of build the stimulus to match their threshold to kind of advance them to the next stage. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we get into something that's a little bit more systematic.
Yes. And strategic in how you make those changes and variations throughout the journey, and just giving them the next little challenge that's appropriate to them, rather than, as some people, just dive in at the deep end and go, I'm going to, like you say, I'm going to do 10 sets of 10 today.
Yeah. And that might be really appropriate. If you come and train with me tomorrow, that might be really appropriate based upon our client intake. You might already be doing that, and I might kind of go, I'm going to make you work a little bit harder, and that's going to be really fun. But for most of the clients that come in here, and we're talking 80%, they're not athletes. They didn't really enjoy the gym before coming here. Maybe they did, but they just got injured, so they're presenting with injuries. This is not their passion. Their passion is being really good at their jobs and being really good with their families. That's what they're passionate about. Why they're coming here is to initiate the change so that they can look better and feel better and be able to live their life. So that's maybe the difference between us as professionals and the clients that come to see us.
Yeah,
for the most part.
Yes, yeah. Well, understanding that, well, it's not their life, but they still want a result, and then and as a result, being efficient with delivering that result is hugely important, because there are some people I know that would, they enjoy training so much that actually doing more for no better result isn't a problem, because they're just a stimulus junkie, and they enjoy that, and that's fine. But as you say,
and that's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, but a large majority of people, massive number of people, that's not the case. But they would like the outcome.
Yeah.
And within that, I think there's no, go for it.
I was just going to say that I've been teaching for I don't know how many years now, a long time, and coming across so many professionals who are so dedicated about being better for their clients, which is really it gets me so excited when people are coming to class. But the one thing that's a really common thing is that there's always injuries. There's always things there. There's always niggles. And the thing with exercise professionals is that, for the most part, if you don't work, you don't earn, because you don't have a full-time salary. And then there's a bit of a fear that's surrounding that. So we kind of, on one hand, we're kind of full pace accelerating and kind of really trying to push our bodies. And then the other, we're fearing challenging our spinal extensors because, if this area gets injured, then I can't work. And there's a real kind of like tipping point there where everyone's kind of on this really kind of narrow ledge of trying to push themselves and not injure themselves. And those basics of, actually just think about stimulating the muscle. Mm-hmm. Think about building exercises where you're creating a full range challenge so you're being more efficient, so that you don't have to train for 10 hours, for 12 hours of doing kind of, junk reps just because you're enjoying the stimulus.
Yes.
There is that kind of, the efficiency thing is a word that we use all the time. And I've heard you mention that about quite a few times on this call right now.
Yeah. It is actually something that, I really took. So for people listening, I was, over at your place last year doing a course, and what I hoped to get out of it from what I'd known about you was an increase in efficiency for my clients when they're performing specific exercises and finding the exercises that are best for them to get the most efficient stimulus. And it's something that I 100% found as a key takeaway, and I would say my ability to deliver that for people was massively improved from it. So I really enjoyed it, and I really recommend that anyone that's considering it get on board and do that, because it can hugely improve your results and the service you can provide, or your own training.
That's awesome.
You mentioned like a full contractile range challenge, and that's something I want to discuss. Yep. But quickly, I realize we've talked about active versus passive without necessarily defining it for people. So for anyone that doesn't know, could you quickly give us a definition of those?
Sure. So when you think about a joint, and let's just think about the elbow, the nervous system and the muscles around the elbow can take you to a certain point. And let's say that for those people that are not watching the video, I'm doing a bicep curl now. And when we do this elbow flexion, my biceps and some forearm muscles are flexing my elbow to a certain degree. It's those muscles around that joint that are taking you to your active range. Now, if something external to you, like my other hand or someone external, pushes you further, you get into a passive range. And that passive range, we don't know why your nervous system has limited your active range at this point in time. We need to do some further investigation, and stretching is not always the answer. But this happens in exercise as well. So when we're on that leg press, when I was doing that 45-degree leg press, when I was putting all the plates on, that machine was pushing me past my active range and my hip, and it was also pushing my spine past its active range. So that's going into the passive range. It's something external to the joint. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. And I think, it's a great point to make in terms of how basically every exercise has the opportunity to do that, because you're loading them, and therefore that can put you to places that you don't necessarily want to go. So then we've got that cleared up. I want to talk about a full contractile range and providing that challenge, and how we can set exercises up to do that, and why that's so important from our efficiency standpoint.
If we and if you guys are listening, and if you're, I don't know where you're going to be listening, but not while you're driving, but while you're listening to this podcast, if you stand up right now, what we're all going to do is a deep squat. And what I want you to do is actually go down into some sort of deep squat, so you're in the bottom position. And all I want you to think about is, where do you want to hang out? If I had to set the timer for 10 minutes, where would you want to spend most of your time? And the chances are there's going to be some people listening to this that are slightly sadistic or want to stay down at the bottom. But most of us want to stay near the top because it's easier. And it's easier because of the distance to these joints and these moment arm things that we might get into at some point. But what we're seeing there is a strength profile. So your body is quote unquote stronger when you're stood upright versus when you're down in a squat position. Now, what that means, if we follow the principles of progressive overload, if we wanted to overload the muscles responsible for that squat, we want something that was lighter at the bottom and gets progressively heavier as you reach the top. The traditional is that we put the barbell on our backs, or we hold onto a dumbbell or a kettlebell or whatever we hold on to. And when you're at the bottom, that is essentially heavier at the bottom and lighter on the top, the way that exercise is set up. So if we can do something, and this is where bands and chains come in, if we can do something that increases the resistance as you reach the top, then we're starting to step forward to creating a full range challenge. And it's the same for a bench press. So if you think of when we've all done a barbell bench press, it's harder because it's heavier when you're at the bottom. And it's actually gradually easier as you go to full lockout. And if we can, again, it might be chains, it might be bands, it might be choosing a different exercise. But if we can modulate the resistance so it gets heavier as we get stronger, again, we're creating something that's getting closer to that full range challenge. There's going to be some exercises where you can't do that. And that's okay. That's where we start to build complementary exercises. But those examples of the squat and the bench press is probably the easiest for us to visualize in our heads, for those that are not watching a video of what a full range challenge is.
Yes.
So the kind of the two RTS words, if you want to call them that go into that, is a strength profile and a resistance profile. So every joint, every plane has got a certain strength profile. So for elbow flexion, we're strongest somewhere in the mid-range and we're weakest in the two extremes. That's the strength profile for elbow flexion. So if we can build an exercise that's got a resistance profile that matches that, then we've got a challenge for that muscle from 0 degrees all the way to 160, 170 degrees. If we go to a cable fly, again, that's got a similar sort of strength profile where we're weak, we get strong somewhere in the middle, and then we get weak again as we come across. So if we can build the resistance profile to match that, every degree of that movement, and this is where the efficiency comes in, because every degree of that movement is under the appropriate level of stimulation.
Yeah, and that's a really exciting thing.
Yeah, and that's so instead of wasting time doing 400 sets of an exercise where you're getting stimulation for a third of the exercise, we can drop the sets down and actually create that full range challenge, that full range stimulation. So if you go back to the squat when you're in the bottom is the hardest point. You're in your weakest position, the exercise is in its hardest position. As you reach the top, the stimulation is dropping off. Doesn't mean you're getting, it doesn't mean that fatigue is not kicking in, you're not finding it hard, but you're not getting the appropriate level of stimulation for those muscles. So let's say you're in a gym and they don't have bands and they don't have chains. I'm not saying don't do that squat. We love that squat. But if the goal is stimulation, which if you want you and your clients to change, stimulation is important. It should be close to number one on your list of priorities. Then we need to start building complementary exercises. So it might be that we go, okay, with this squat, we're not getting a challenge for the quads, for example, from 45 degrees to 0 degrees. So let's couple that exercise with leg extension.
Yeah.
That's where we start to see this overlap of how we kind of program, how we select these exercises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's the sort of the magic here is that you then get a picture of how you piece together not only just exercises, but exercises within a program to complement each other to get the overall result. And from someone who's wanting just that outcome, they want to be bigger or have bigger muscles. This is hugely significant because number one, in some instances, you can almost in just one exercise fully stimulate a muscle, whereas before you maybe took 3. But also on it, as you say, when certain movements that just don't lend themselves to being able to do that, if you don't have the equipment, bands, chains on a squat, knowing how to intelligently complement that. For example, a lot of people will be like, oh, I did back squats and then I did front squats. And whilst they are different exercises, they're not challenging those different ranges, and you're getting a 1 + 1 equals, well, not 2 scenario or whatever, as opposed to if you can fill in those gaps, it's maybe a 1 + 1 equals 4.
And do you know one of the interesting things? So the back squat versus the front squat. So if we read our books over there, it's going to tell you that the front squat is more of a quad challenge, I think. And so on the last lower body class, we had 25 people all do the back squat and the front squat. And we actually filmed quite a few of them. So we did this for like an internal education thing. So the amount of difference between the front squat and the back squat for definitely closing on 20 of those individuals was virtually nothing. Because what happens is the nervous system, it depends upon limb length and a bunch of other things, but the nervous system reorganizes to make that person the most efficient. Its number one priority is not to fall over. And then its number two priority is to be able to perform this movement and go to a certain depth that it's able to pull up from. So this idea that the front squat is more quad than the back squat is highly dependent upon that individual.
Yeah.
One other thing with the stimulus, because you mentioned, if our goal is hypertrophy, and apart from our athletes, that's the goal for nearly all of our clients. And so for our athletes, my cyclist, she does not want to get heavier. She wants her force output to increase. She wants to get stronger. But if she puts a kilogram of mass on her body, that's actually going to put her power to weight ratio. It's going to make it worse. And that's something we need to think about with them. But for our clients that are physique athletes, for our clients that are general population, for our clients that want fat loss and they want to look good, and for our clients that come in for injury rehab, they all have a requirement for building muscle. And, for some of the clients that come here that are in more physique and bodybuilding, they come here and they train here and they also train by themselves, and they've got up to 4, 5, maybe 6 hours for one individual I'm thinking about. For our general population clients, they've got 2 to 3 hours. So in 2 to 3 hours, we need to figure out how do we create the best stimulation for their bodies. And that's where, although we think about this as an advanced thing, building good resistance profiles, for our general population clients, this is gold.
Yeah.
And this is how we get really, really good, substantial results with clients.
Yeah, I mean, it was arguably more important because they haven't got the time to hit everything from all the different angles. Take the scattergun approach, which eventually gets you there, but by chance, with someone with lots of hours available to train, if you've only got a couple, you need to be really laser focused, and this enhances that.
It's really the difference between me trying to build a kitchen and a master carpenter coming in and building a kitchen.
Yeah,
like I'm just going to be hammering the shit out of everything because I got no idea.
You ever tried to build a kitchen?
I have. Yes.
Yeah. How did it end up for you?
I'm a personal trainer, so that
good, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I think it's a hugely valuable concept and thing to grasp, and then once you get it, you can then look at exercises in a different way, and it just makes a massive difference. You're kind of looking at everything through a slightly different lens, and definitely delivering better results. So I was trying to think of some ways we can describe it again to people to give them some practical examples, but I think an important concept to understand is kind of like lever arms or moment arms or whatever, and how expanding on that point that at certain points a weight is heavier or it feels heavier than it is at another point. So could you give a different example of that so someone can help to visualize and put this into practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's there are 2 books up there that are biomechanics books that make the mistake of saying a lever arm and a moment arm are the same. And on Instagram, I'm seeing that often. They're actually 2 completely different things. And so let's park lever arm for another call another time. So we're thinking about moment arm. Everyone knows what a dumbbell lateral raise looks like. And everyone probably knows where they could spend most of their time. And that's with the arm down by the side. And that's because there's no work being done. So when you reach out to the side, that's got the biggest moment arm. So if we're looking at moment arm, we need to find something called a line of force, and we need to find an axis, and we're delving into this topic right now. But bear with me and hopefully it kind of makes sense. If you imagine someone doing that lateral raise, their arms out to the sides, that dumbbell, if you were to drop it, would go straight to the floor. So now you know where the line of force is. It's going straight down. And the axis is the point of which everything rotates around. So in this case, it's in the shoulder. So for you guys that are watching on the video, there's going to be an axis somewhere there when this is coming up. And let me just move this camera down so you can see this. So we've got an axis which is in the front of the shoulder. And you guys listening, you're just going to have to imagine that I'm prodding my shoulder right now. So when the arm comes out to the side, you can see that this is the center. And it's kind of like if you look at a bicycle and you look at the middle of the wheel is the axis. The wheel is turning around the axis in the middle. So when your arm is out to the side, that is the furthest away that weight could be, that line of force could be from the axis. When the arm's down by the side, if you were to drop the dumbbell, which way would it go? It would still go straight down. So that line of force is actually going straight through the shoulder at this point. And so what we're seeing here is the amount of torque that's dictated by the dumbbell multiplied by that distance. So when you're down at the side, if that dumbbell, let's say, I don't know, Tom, I know you lift like 20 kilogram, you do 20 kilogram lateral raises. So 20 kilograms multiplied by 0 is 0.
Mm-hmm.
20 kilograms multiplied by, how long's your arm?
Really long.
Yes,
I don't,
2 meters.
Yeah, we'll go with that. That long, yeah.
So 20 times whatever that distance is now the amount of stimulus that's going onto that tissue. So you can see that as you reach the top, it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. Let's switch that to a cable. So you guys that are listening have probably done a cable lateral raise before, where the cable is, the pulley system is somewhere near your hand when it's down by the side, but the cable's going off at a 90-degree angle. So right now, as soon as you lift the weight, you've got the biggest moment arm and you've got stimulus already from the start on the deltoid. And then as you raise to the side, this is going to be hard to visualize, but the cable gets closer to the shoulder, which means the line of force gets closer to the shoulder. It actually gets lighter when you reach out to the side. So what we've got there is the same movement, and this is why movement is not irrelevant. That would be unfair, but the movement's not the issue here. It's the forces that are applied to that movement. So the dumbbell lateral raise, to cut a long story short, it is heaviest when you're in your weakest position. The cable lateral raise is heaviest when you're closer to your strongest position. And the cable lateral raise actually gets lighter when you get weaker, which means you've got a challenge from 0 degrees to 30 to 60 and to 90.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, does that just inside of the picture inside your head when I'm saying this, does that make sense to you? Is that coming across well on this?
Yes.
On this call?
I suppose I'm slightly biased because I kind of know what you mean before you were saying it, but yeah, I got that explanation, and I think people listening will understand what you were saying there and how that makes a difference, and how, as a result, the challenge presented to the muscle is completely different. By changing the implement, but then how that dictates lines of force and moment arms.
And here's a little kind of like a trick. When you're doing an exercise, and just mess around in the gym, because it's nice to mess around. Grab hold of your 20k dumbbell and try to perform that lateral raise, going 6 seconds up, 6 seconds down. And what you'll find is you're not going to reach the top. So for you to get to the top, what you actually need to do is initiate and kind of like get the mass moving as quickly as you can. So what you're trying to do is your Olympic lifting, your dumbbell lateral raise. You're trying to use those techniques and those skills, which are awesome, to get into this range, which means you're not getting the stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with when you're doing a bent over single arm dumbbell row. We're always going to that 500k dumbbell, and all we're trying to do, because there's no resistance at the bottom, you're just trying to launch it to get into the shortest position. So in that kneeling or bent over single arm dumbbell row, the resistance profile is 0 at the bottom, and it gets gradually heavier when you reach that fully flexed position where the dumbbell's coming up to your torso. Mm-hmm. And that again is because of the moment arms that are going to the elbow and the shoulder. They're getting bigger as you get into that range.
Yeah. So Just quickly, a couple of things. So we talked about earlier on squats and presses, so extensor type movements, and the strength profile you have through that movement pattern is different to if a pulling movement pattern, and likewise for a single joint you have a different strength profile. Could you walk us through quickly the differences between those and how, because then they have implications for how you would program and choose exercises and adjust exercise.
So let's have a think about the three. Well, let's have a think about the three exercises we mentioned. So we've talked about squats, we've talked about the dumbbell row, and then we've talked about a bicep curl. So a squat is actually the same as a bench press. So when you're in your folded up position, so in the bench press, it's where the bar's closer to your chest than not. In the squat, it's where you're closer to the floor than not. That is where you're in your weakest position. And as you raise up to the top, you're gradually getting stronger. In the bench press, as you're pushing to full lockout, you're gradually getting stronger. So the resistance profile there, if we were to draw like a chart on the board behind me, in the bottom position, you're weaker and you get strong. On the dumbbell row, it's the flip. So when your arm is further away from the body, and this could be actually if you're doing like a seated cable row as well, you're actually in your strongest position and you gradually get weaker as you start to fold up, as you bring the bar or the dumbbell closer to your body. So if we were drawing that chart again, we start off in a stronger position, and then when you fold up, you're getting weaker. And then the final one is the single joint. So the single joint, you're thinking leg extension, leg curl, dumbbell lateral raise, bicep curl. You're really going from a relatively weak to a strong to a relatively weak again. And this is kind of, we could break every area of the body down and start getting specific, and that's what we're doing here in terms of, because the relative strength profile for this is actually different to this, but those are the generalized scheme. Mm-hmm. And that's for the listeners at home. It's really it's trying to wrap our head around at this point just kind of this concept of a strength profile.
Yeah.
So let's think about some exercises. So if you're in the gym and you're doing a cable row, so where your feet are on the machine and you're sat down and you're bringing that cable in, most cable machines don't change the resistance. So the easiest point in that range is when you're fully locked out and you're gradually getting weaker and weaker and weaker, which means that the way that thing is performed, we might see people start to do that rowing motion like it's an explosive movement, like really trying to launch it. And again, it's the launching, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but for definitely a lot of our general population clients, we're starting to miss out on that stimulation.
Yeah. I think it's critical for people to get their head around that concept, because they'll think, all right, halfway through they might have been thinking, brilliant, accommodating resistance, bands and chains, job's good, but actually that's great for your extensor movements, your squats, your presses, but for pulling movements, your rows is very different. And then once you've got your head around that, you can start to fine tune things and maximize your results by adjusting exercises and trying to get that full contractile challenge. It seems to me you're pulling multi-joint pulling movements are the kind of the most difficult one for people to get, because there's not an obvious accommodating resistance way to do it. And then you can focus on, okay, well I'm going to use just a load that challenged me in the shortened range, and then maybe I use a heavier load to work that initial range, and then how you put those together. And I think that's where you could probably go, a whole other podcast just talking about that. But once you start thinking about these things,
I've got a really easy thing for that. Yeah. So if you've got that type of exercise, if you've got any machine where you can't change the resistance, so we change the cams in here. We've got ways to do that. And again, you can add bands and all of that stuff. But if you've got an exercise such as that cable row, there's a really easy solution to that, and that's you just change the weight and you do partials. Mm-hmm. So there's no reason why you can't think, oh, hold on, so the cable row, I'm going to be weakest when I'm folded up here. So let's start there. Let's put it on a relatively light weight, or a weight that you can use, and do your 8, 10, 200 reps or whatever it is. And then what you want to do is think, so that's the top third. Now you're going to do the bottom 2/3. Put the weight on. So do a second set, move that, and go from full to 2/3 in.
Yeah.
And doing stuff like that that's even how we have to, we've got some really good Cybex equipment here. We have to adjust some of this stuff, and we do partials all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who are coming on class, they don't have access to our leg extension, and they're in a commercial gym. So they have to do partials. So they might do like the top 20 degrees on the leg extension and then add more resistance to do the bottom,
mm-hmm.
because you want it dropping off when you get to that point.
Yeah.
I would be, for everyone, I would highly recommend that everyone explores this. And I would highly recommend one of two things. And this is just good. In your mind, always think this has got to be appropriate. And this is, you've got to do it to yourself. Don't practice on clients, because, they're paying you for service. But slow everything down and make everything really heavy. Because when everything's light, when most people are buying equipment and they go to these trade shows and they're wearing nice shiny suits, they're not pushing this thing really hard, and everything feels nice when you've got nothing on there. So make things heavy and slow everything down and see what's happening to this. And that's how you just test it. You're just playing around. You're doing pull-ups. You're actually strongest here, and you get weaker when you get to this point. The solution that we've all used is we attach, like a massive woody band around.
Yeah.
But that's just helping here. And it actually doesn't help when you get to your weakest point. So we don't want to necessarily, like, I would advocate using bands and chains, but don't jump on it just because we're seeing it on Instagram. Actually try it out and do that same thing. Make it heavy and slow down.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's, we're going to see a lot of things there.
Yeah. And interesting you say, so the chin-ups with the band assisted, I mean, it actually opposes your strength curve with the assistance it gives. But I mean, I'm not saying, I wouldn't say they were completely useless, because I think some people get a skill of moving themselves around a bar from it. But yeah, realizing that, just throwing a band on doesn't solve everything and immediately give you that full contractile challenge. We're sort of closing up on running out of time here, Michael, and I think, we've just scratched the surface, so we might have to get you back on to do some, another one, another time if you're willing. But I want to quickly go through, it's actually a quick fire round, unrelated, but just to let people know a little bit more about you. Either or questions. So those questions are pizza or burger?
Burger.
Burger, good shout. Chocolate or peanut butter?
Chocolate.
Beach holiday or city break?
City break.
Steak, rare or well done?
Rare.
Yeah, no one's ever answered anything other than that. I'm waiting for the person to tell me rare, well done. And last one is eggs, scrambled or poached?
Scrambled.
Okay, good. Now, can you tell us...
That was easy.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. No, I'll have to make them a bit more challenging. Can you tell us something about you that people probably don't know?
I study graphic design.
There we go.
So I originally, when I was working in a gym, I was studying, doing A levels and GNVQ and the foundation in graphic design.
Okay, cool. And last question is, if I had access to anyone in the world, who should I interview next?
Tom Purvis.
Yeah. I might need you to organise that. So thanks very much for your time today. It's been fascinating. I think you probably have opened the listeners' minds to a whole bunch of concepts. It's basically a can of worms. They're probably thinking, I've got to re-listen to that because I'm getting some of it. I'm piecing it together. It's an ongoing journey, and I really encourage people to dive into your stuff and learn more about it. If they want to know more, how do they go about finding out more about you and the services you offer?
So website is integra-training.net. We have got a bunch of videos that are coming online on our YouTube channel. So look for Integra Education, and our Instagram, integra.education. We've actually got a couple of series there. So we've got this Muscle of the Week that there's another one coming out in a couple of days, but we have this series called Moment on Monday, which is actually looking at and analyzing all of these exercises. And so we're actually putting a lot of visuals on there because it's really, back to your point, this is a can of worms. But it just requires consistency, and just seeing this stuff, it just requires a little bit of time and consistency. And then, over a period of weeks, months, years, we just get a lot more precise with our scalpel. Mm-hmm. We get a lot more precise with our hammer. We just, this is for me, this is my career, and this is what I'm passionate about. And the more we do the practice away from our clients, when we come to our clients with all of the different people we see, it just becomes really, really simple and efficient. And that's what excites me. So I do appreciate that when we're talking about principles, sometimes it goes big picture and vague, and I do try to bring it down. And maybe next time we'll maybe have a look at some case studies.
Yeah, I think that'd be fantastic. Yeah,
put some videos into there. But yeah, it's been this was a lot of fun.
Cool. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for taking the time, and I'll make sure all the links and everything in the show notes, so everyone can quickly and easily find everything.
Cool. Thank you, Tom.
That wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for investing your time with us. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed what you heard and took value from it, please do me a favour by heading to iTunes right now, subscribing to the show, and leaving a review. Positive reviews, like 5 stars, hint hint, really help the ranking of the show and will help us to spread the word and keep getting top-class guests on. Make sure to follow Breaking Muscle on social media and me at Tom McCormick, that's TomMaccormick on Instagram. Bye for now, and I'm looking forward to catching you on the next episode of the Breaking Muscle podcast.